I would just like to give a quick shout out to all my Twitter/X peeps. At this point in time, Twitter is a lot better than the YouTubes as far as like free speech goes. I said some shit on there the other day that would have got my fucking contract canceled on YouTube. Elon just gives me a fucking 12-hour slap on the wrist. Yeah. So, shout out to Elon. Shout out to Moeller. Shout out to Steve Inman. Shout out to Laverne Spicer. Shout out to Michael Deacon. Shout out to Ninja Shoes. Who else? Shout out to Big Foam. There was somebody else. Oh yeah, shout out to Satan. Shout out to the Church of Satan. No shout out to the 50 or 60 fucking bots. Bots. I only have like 10 real followers, but if you go to my fucking shit, I'm probably up around 70 now. So, 60 of those is bots. I just got tired of fucking blocking them. Anyway, time to make a nice video. Part 10.
Most of the killing and the mayhem of these very violent crimes along with Charles Watson. So nobody ever speaks about her much or even remembers her because they think of Susan Atkins, because again, it's like Hollywood typecasting. Atkins looks like what you could imagine a brainwashed, satanic, hippie murderess would look like, and Krenwinkel doesn't. So it's part of this whole media presentation. But Krenwinkel was, by her own account, a very isolated, lonely young woman who got drawn into Manson's group because he was one of the few people who was ever loving to her or kind to her. And the thing about her is she was the most violent of these people when it came down to it. Susan Atkins, who has the reputation of being Sexy Sadie, the evil murderess, doesn't seem to have actually been involved too much in the actual crime. It was Krenwinkel who did a lot of the savagery. That Charles Watson did most of it, but Krenwinkel should be known as one of the murderers, but she's not really thought of that way. She's sort of always shunted to the side. But, as I said, if we were to accurately describe these crimes, they are Watson-Krenwinkel murders, not the Manson murders. So that's an important thing to consider. But when Manson met her, she was a deeply religious Christian, sort of counterculture Christian, as Manson was. So again, not in any way any kind of occult beliefs or anything that have been projected on these people. She was one of the most pious and Christian of the young women that got attracted to the group. But the thing to remember about her, you sort of have to ask, why is she so unknown? Because she actually did a great deal of the killing, but most people have forgotten her. So that just says something about the misrepresentation and misreporting of the case. It's always the more glamorous or bizarre or grotesque characters like Susan Atkins, who's like central casting as an evil hippie who gets pushed in the front of the TV show, and Krenwinkel sort of gets lost, as is the next figure, Linda Kasabian.
And what do we know about Linda Kasabian?
Well, again, maybe the most useful way to approach her is to look at the myth and then try to get to what we can discern of the reality. If you look at Helter Skelter, the book, the film, and the way that the mainstream media just regurgitates it mindlessly, this false narrative, Linda Kasabian was a innocent hippie angel who was briefly involved with the Manson group. Now, we have to look at this. She joined, if you could even speak of anything as formal as joining this commune in July of 1969, and these murders, this crime spree of connected but also disconnected murders that occurred, all happened in August. We're supposed to believe that this woman, who was practically a stranger to Manson, had met him in, I believe, July 4th of 1969, that he would entrust her to go out on this killing mission to create Helter Skelter. But as I got to know Manson, it was clear that he really hardly knew her. I mean, she was there on the Spahn Ranch for a very brief time. What I believe, now the main thing about her myth is the way Vincent Bugliosi presented her. And we have to back up a bit here. Vincent Bugliosi first went to Susan Atkins and said, "We will give you immunity, full immunity, if you will testify against the others." And she would have been allowed out if she turned state's evidence against the co-defendants, if you follow me. Well, eventually Bugliosi turned away from that deal and instead found, when Linda Kasabian was arrested, he thought, well, she seems like a more believable witness. I mean, he was a liar, but he was a genius as a prosecutor, and he knew this Linda Kasabian, who looks kind of a much more wholesome figure than Susan Atkins, is going to be a more credible witness for the prosecution. So he basically left Susan Atkins in the lurch, who was going to testify, and made the same deal with Linda Kasabian. So probably what the public knows about her, if they're even aware of the story to this extent, is that she was an innocent girl who sort of got caught up in the crime. The way Bugliosi presented it, the only reason she was sent to the Polanski house on August 8th, 9th of 1969, when these murders occurred, was because she had a valid driver's license. That's what we're supposed to believe is the motivation for this evil, manipulative criminal genius picking a stranger to do this very delicate operation because she was the only one with a valid driver's license. Furthermore, we're supposed to believe she stood outside the house, the Polanski house, when the murders happened. She was horrified by what was occurring. She wanted to break away from them, but she was too terrified. This is the myth Bugliosi presented so that she would be a credible witness against the commune. In fact, according to my research, I believe Kasabian and Watson were the major instigators of that particular night of mayhem. Linda Kasabian, before she was presented as this angelic star witness who had gone wrong, in Boston, where she came from, she had already been arrested in a circle of drug dealers. When she met the Manson commune, Charles Tex Watson immediately, the day he met her, convinced her to steal $5,000 from her husband at the time, which she went and did. So she was already a criminal. She was already a drug dealer. And another interesting factor is she had already been at drug parties at the house next door to where the couple LaBiancas lived. She already was familiar with the house next door to it at a drug party scene that was going on there. So her background was already a criminal, and her initiation into the commune was stealing $5,000 from her own husband to bring to Charles Tex Watson. I believe, though this has not at all been part of the mainstream narrative, that $5,000 ended up buying drugs that eventually created this chain of events that led to the murders that occurred. So far from innocent. Now, why did she instigate these murders with Tex Watson? Is because, as far as my research has indicated, she and Tex Watson had gone to the Polanski house at Cielo Drive and had purchased from Wojtek Frykowski, friend of Roman Polanski's, who was living in his house with his girlfriend Abigail Folger while Polanski was in Europe working on a film. Frykowski was getting into the drug dealing business, financed by Abigail Folger, who was the heiress to the Folger coffee industry. Wojtek Frykowski sold Charles Tex Watson and Linda Kasabian some MDA, what was the originator of what we would today call ecstasy, a slightly different chemical arrangement. But that was the new party drug, the new sensation among the rock and roll and film elite that was experimenting with psychedelics at that time. So Tex Watson, who was a drug dealer, and Linda Kasabian, also deeply involved in the drug trade, went to buy some from Frykowski at the Tate House. And exactly what was wrong with it, I haven't been able to determine, but it wasn't good. And so when they tried to sell it to others, they got complaints. And apparently a lot of people in the drug community in that week had purchased bad MDA from Frykowski. And Frykowski had bought it from some Canadian drug dealers, which, as I explained in the Manson file, was also a key factor to the murders and what they were all about, but maybe too complicated to get into with the time allotted here. But the important thing, you have to get this straight. Linda Kasabian, right now, under an assumed name, is living as a free woman, but as far as my research has shown, she instigated the crime that is best known. She and Tex Watson went back to the house to rob Frykowski and Jay Sebring, who was also a drug dealer at the time, to get back at them for what was known in the parlance of 60s drug dealing as burning them on a